He saw the message. 3 letters, SOS. And he put the phone face down on the nightstand, rolled over, and pulled another woman closer. That choice, 3 seconds, no hesitation, cost him everything he never knew he was about to lose. This is the story of Ethan Calloway, a man who had an empire and lost a family, who had power and lost the only person who ever actually saw him, like this video. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And don't you dare leave before the ending. Bah, miss. The night Ethan Calloway ignored his wife's SOS, it was raining in Chicago. Not the dramatic kind of rain that announces itself with thunder and spectacle, the quiet kind. The kind that fogs the windows of hotel suites and makes the world outside feel like it belongs to a different universe entirely. Room 1407 at the Meridian Grand smelled like expensive cologne and room service that had gone cold on the cart by the door. The curtains were drawn, the city was invisible, and Ethan was exactly where he'd told himself he deserved to be. He was 41 years old, 6'1", lean in the way that men who move through danger stay lean, not from vanity, but from a body that never fully relaxed. His hair was dark, cut close on the sides, threaded with gray at the temples, that Madeline used to touch sometimes when she thought he was asleep. He had the kind of face that read as calm to everyone who didn't know him, and as something harder to everyone who did. His jaw was always set. His eyes were always calculating. Even now, stretched across the tangled sheets of a hotel bed, with Vanessa Hart's fingers tracing lazy patterns across his chest, there was a part of Ethan's mind that was somewhere else, running numbers, assessing angles. It never stopped. Vanessa shifted against him and made a soft sound that was designed to pull his attention back to the room. She was good at that, pulling attention. She was 34, blonde in the way that required maintenance and money, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of shallow water over sand. Green, almost. Not quite. She'd told him her story in pieces over the 7 months they'd been seeing each other. Real estate investor, divorced once, no kids by choice, independent. She said the word independent like it was a virtue, like it separated her from the women who needed things. Ethan had believed every word. He still believed every word. On that particular night, when his phone lit up on the nightstand, he saw it from the corner of his eye. The screen glowed white in the dim room. He registered the name, Madeline, before he registered anything else. And something moved in his chest, something reflexive and old. The same thing that used to move in him when he was 26, and she was 23, and she'd call him at 2 in the morning just because she couldn't sleep and wanted to hear his voice. That old thing. He recognized it, and then he pressed it flat. SOS. He read it again, his jaw tightened. Vanessa ran her fingers up the center of his chest and said, "Who is it?" "Nobody," Ethan said. He turned the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't look at it again. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, because he had put the phone face down and returned his attention to a woman who was not his wife, was that at that exact moment, 40 minutes north in the Calloway estate in Winnetka, Madeline was sitting on the kitchen floor. She was sitting on the kitchen floor because her legs had stopped working. It had started 20 minutes earlier while she was loading the dishwasher. Oliver and Charlotte were both in bed. Oliver was 6, and Charlotte had just turned 4, and they'd both been asleep since 8:30 after the kind of bath time chaos that left water on the tiles and small wet footprints leading down the hallway. The house was quiet. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, the quiet had texture, weight, and it pressed down on Madeline's sternum like something physical. She'd been having the feeling for weeks. That pressure, that breathlessness, that specific variety of loneliness that is worse than the kind you feel when you're truly alone because it comes with the awareness that someone is supposed to be here and isn't. She'd been rinsing a glass when her hands started shaking. By the time she made it to the kitchen counter, the shaking had spread to her shoulders, and her vision had narrowed at the edges, and her lungs were doing something wrong, pulling in air but not delivering it, cycling faster and faster in a loop that wasn't sustaining anything. She knew on some intellectual level what was happening. She'd read about panic attacks. She'd never had one before. Knowing the clinical name for a thing does not make the thing less terrifying when it is happening to your body in your kitchen at 9:47 on a Tuesday night while your children sleep upstairs and the only person you are supposed to be able to call is in a hotel room 40 minutes away with his phone face down on a nightstand. She slid down the cabinet to the floor. She pressed her back against the lower cabinets and pulled her knees to her chest and focused on the grout lines between the kitchen tiles. Gray and white. Gray and white. She breathed. She tried to breathe. Her hands were still shaking when she grabbed her phone off the counter above her and typed 3 letters and hit send and then sat there on the cold floor, waiting. The message delivered. The message was read. Nothing came back. She sat there for 45 minutes on that kitchen floor, waiting for the phone to ring. It didn't ring. The house made its nighttime sounds around her. The furnace cycling, the refrigerator's low hum, the creak of the house settling into the October cold. And Madeline sat in the center of all of it, with her back against the cabinet and her knees against her chest, and something in her chest that was not a panic attack, something quieter than a panic attack, something that had been building for a very long time and had finally, on that kitchen floor, finished building. She finally stood up, washed her face at the kitchen sink, turned off the lights, walked upstairs and checked on Oliver, then Charlotte, both of them deeply asleep, unbothered, beautiful in the way that children are beautiful when the world hasn't gotten to them yet. She stood in the doorway of Charlotte's room for a long time. Then she went to her bedroom, the bedroom she slept in alone more nights than not, and lay down on top of the covers without changing her clothes, and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to think a thought she had been keeping carefully locked away. She thought, I cannot do this anymore. Ethan came home at noon the next day. He came home looking the way he always looked after nights away. Showered, pressed, carrying coffee, the kind of man who walked into rooms like he owned them, because he usually did. The house was quiet when he came in. Madeline was in the kitchen making lunch. Oliver was at school. Charlotte was at preschool. The morning had passed, and Madeline had moved through it with the specific mechanical efficiency of a person who has made a quiet decision and is waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. Ethan set his coffee on the island and said, Hey. Madeline said, Hey. He looked at her for a moment. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater, her dark hair pulled back, and she was cutting an apple into quarters with a precision that looked almost deliberate. He noticed. He always noticed things. It was the part of his brain that never turned off. That she wasn't looking at him. Long night, he said. I'm sure it was, she said. Business ran late. He pulled out a stool and sat down. You know how it gets? I do, she said. He picked up his phone and started scrolling. 30 seconds of silence. 45. He didn't look up. Everything okay? He said, eyes still on the screen. Madeline set down the knife. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and said, You saw my message last night. He looked up. Yeah, I meant to call. Things got... You saw it, she said again. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement, spoken quietly, with the steadiness of someone who has already processed the worst of their anger and come out the other side into something colder and harder to argue with. Mad, I had a panic attack, she said. I was on the kitchen floor for 45 minutes. He put the phone down. Why didn't you call someone? Your mom or... I called you, she said. I sent you an SOS and you read it and you chose not to call me back. The word chose landed in the kitchen and stayed there. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't know it was that serious. SOS. You could have been joking. You could have needed me to pick something up from the... An SOS, Madeline said softly, is not a grocery list. He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not going to fight about last night, she said. She picked up the knife again and finished cutting the apple. Her hands were completely steady. I don't have the energy for it. I just want you to know that I was on the kitchen floor and I needed you and you read my message and you made a choice. And I understand now. I understand what that choice means. Madeline, please don't. She put the apple slices on a plate and moved to the refrigerator. I have to pick up Charlotte at 2. You can do whatever you need to do. He watched her move around the kitchen with that unsettling steadiness and felt something unfamiliar move through him. Not guilt exactly, because guilt required a reckoning he wasn't prepared for yet, but something adjacent to it. A warning signal, distant and easy to ignore, like a light on a dashboard that he told himself he'd deal with later. He picked up his coffee. He picked up his phone. "I'll make it up to you this weekend," he said. "I'll take the kids to that place they like. We'll—" "Sure," Madeline said, her back to him. Madeline. "Sure, Ethan." He left an hour later. Something came up. Something always came up. He kissed her on the cheek on his way out, and she let him and didn't lean into it, and he drove away from the estate feeling the unease fade with every mile, replacing itself with the familiar weight of business and decisions and the particular forward momentum of being Ethan Calloway, a man who solved problems and moved on. Behind him, in the kitchen, Madeline stood at the window and watched the car until it disappeared. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. The Calloway estate had 14 rooms and cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Ethan had bought it 6 years ago, shortly after Oliver was born, when the legitimate front of his operation, Calloway Capital, a private investment firm with offices in the Loop, had generated the kind of profit that required impressive real estate to launder convincingly. The house had a chef's kitchen, a wine cellar, a home gym, a pool that was heated even in October, and grounds that a landscaping crew maintained twice a week. It was beautiful in the way that things purchased for strategic reasons rather than love are sometimes beautiful. Impressive, impeccable, slightly cold. Madeline had tried to make it a home. She'd tried with the throw pillows on the couches and the children's drawings on the refrigerator and the herb garden she'd planted in the kitchen window, even though no one but her ever cooked. She'd tried with dinner parties that Ethan attended when he could and abandoned when he couldn't, with Christmas decorations that she and the kids put up while he was away, with weekends that she filled with activity to paper over the absence at the center of all of it. She had been trying for 6 years. Before that, before Oliver, before the estate, before Calloway Capital had grown into the machine it was now, she had known who she was marrying. She wasn't naive. She'd understood what Ethan's business involved at its real level, the level below the investment firm letterhead. She'd understood it, and she had married him anyway because she was 24, and she loved him with the absolute conviction of a person who believes love is sufficient insulation against anything. She knew now what she hadn't known then. Love is not insulation. Love is a material, and it degrades. And if you don't add anything to it, if you strip it down to its basics, and then strip it down further and further, leaving it thinner every year, eventually you reach the point where there's nothing left to hold anything up. She hadn't stopped loving Ethan. That was the part that made it so exhausting. She had stopped trusting that loving him meant anything. She had stopped believing that being his wife was a real thing rather than a title she held, like a position in a company where the CEO had forgotten she existed. She had stopped being able to remember the last time he had looked at her, really looked at her, without the distraction of whatever else was demanding his attention. She had been trying to tell him this for 2 years. She had tried in the careful, measured language of a person who has read enough relationship books to know that you're supposed to use I statements and avoid accusation and leave room for the other person's perspective. She had tried in the messy, tearful language of 3 a.m. arguments that ended with Ethan saying, "I'll do better," and Madeline saying, "I know," and both of them falling asleep on opposite sides of the bed, believing something had been communicated when nothing had. She had tried, and she had tried, and she had landed on the kitchen floor at 9:47 on a Tuesday, sending 3 letters into a silence that swallowed them whole. Something had finished building that night. She knew what she needed to do. She just needed to do it. The thing about Ethan Calloway was that he had not always been this version of himself. There had been another version. She had married that one. She remembered the night they met, a charity function at the Art Institute, 7 years before the estate and the children and the gradual disappearance of the man she thought she knew. She'd been there with a friend, killing an hour before they went somewhere more interesting, and he'd been standing near the bar with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and the specific posture of a man who was bored by his own success. He had looked at her from across the room with the directness of someone who had decided something without consulting her about it. She'd thought it was arrogant. She'd walked over anyway. He'd been funny. Not polished funny, not the performing humor of a man working a room, but genuinely, unexpectedly funny. Self-deprecating in ways that powerful men rarely allowed themselves to be, capable of laughing at the absurdity of the world he moved through. He'd been curious about her. She was working on her master's in art history at the time, a choice her own family had regarded with skepticism, and Ethan had asked questions that demonstrated he was actually listening to the answers. He'd known things about Hopper and Basquiat that she hadn't expected him to know. They'd been inseparable for 3 months before she found out the full scope of what he did. By then, it was too late to apply logic to any of it. She was already in love with the real version of him, the version that appeared when the performance dropped, and she had decided, another kitchen floor decision, made standing up, that she could live with the rest of it. She had not anticipated that the rest of it would eventually consume the real version entirely. The art history questions stopped. The self-deprecating humor calcified into something more closed and defended. He moved through the world with increasing efficiency and decreasing softness, and she understood, she was not a stupid woman, that the world he moved through punished softness, that the men he dealt with would read it as weakness and exploit it. She understood it. She even respected it, on some level. But she watched the person she had fallen in love with recede further and further behind the functionality of Ethan Calloway, operator, strategist, provider. Provider. He provided. He provided magnificently. The estate proved it. The cars proved it. The children wanted for nothing material. And Madeline had been left alone in the center of all that provision to want the one thing it couldn't buy, which was the person she had chosen. The affair, when she found out about it, was almost a relief. Not because it hurt less than she'd expected. It hurt more, actually, a specific and savage kind of pain that she had not been prepared for, even though she had occasionally, in her lowest moments, suspected something. But because it gave a name to the thing, it converted a diffuse, difficult-to-articulate failing into a concrete, undeniable fact. Ethan Calloway was having an affair. That could be said out loud. That could be held in both hands and examined clearly. She'd found out 4 months ago. Not from Ethan. From a photograph on a phone that had been left unlocked on the counter. One of those collisions of stupidity and bad timing that end things that would otherwise have continued deteriorating slowly for years. She'd looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she'd set the phone back down on the counter exactly where she'd found it. She had not confronted him that night. She had sat with it for 4 months, examining it, deciding what it meant and what she was going to do about it. The panic attack had not been caused by the discovery. She'd made her peace with that discovery in ways she couldn't fully explain. The panic attack had been caused by the SOS. Not the sending of it, the reading of it, and the silence that followed. That was the thing that had finished building. Ethan had 12 missed calls by the time he sat down in the private meeting room on the 32nd floor of the building on Michigan Avenue where Callaway Capital kept its second set of offices. The ones that didn't appear in any public registry. The calls were from Marcus Ewan, his operations director, which meant something had gone wrong in the distribution chain. Ethan called him back while his assistant brought coffee, and the room filled with the subdued, controlled energy of men managing something that had gone sideways. Marcus was 47, Chinese-American, built like a former lineman gone methodical, and the most reliable person in Ethan's operation. He had been with Ethan for 11 years, and he communicated exclusively in facts and never in panic, which was how Ethan knew that the problem was real when Marcus said, without preamble, "We've got a leak." "Where?" Ethan said. "East Side Warehouse. Someone talked to Federici's people." Federici. Anthony. Federici ran the South Side, an arrangement that Ethan had maintained through careful negotiation for 6 years, a détente built on mutual advantage and the shared understanding that crossing it would be expensive for both sides. A leak to Federici's organization meant someone in Ethan's structure had either been flipped or had made an independent business decision that was going to cost them significantly. "How confident are you?" Ethan said. 70%, Marcus said. "Enough to move on." "Find out who. Don't touch anything until I'm there." He ended the call and sat for a moment with the coffee he hadn't touched. The room was very quiet. 3 men waited for his direction with the practiced stillness of people who had learned that interrupting Ethan Calloway's processing time was a category of error you made once. This was the world. This was the actual shape of his life. This room, these men, this endless sequence of fires requiring his specific and personal extinguishing. There was a version of a story where he was the victim of his own success, where the demands of what he'd built had grown beyond what any single person could reasonably manage, and he'd made human choices in the pressure of that. He knew the version of that story. He told it to himself occasionally, late at night, in the moments before sleep arrived. He was aware in a part of himself that he didn't examine frequently that the story had holes in it, that Madeline had asked him, more than once, in more than one language, to come back, that the demands of the empire were real, but so were the choices he made about how to respond to them, that a man with his resources could have built a structure around his family, could have drawn lines, could have protected the thing that, if he stopped and let himself feel it, he knew was the most real thing in his life. He hadn't drawn those lines. He hadn't protected that thing. He'd chosen, repeatedly, to let it wait. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, and the three waiting men came to attention, and the moment of reckoning passed, as it always did, replaced by the next problem that needed solving. At 4:15 that afternoon, while Ethan sat in a warehouse on the west side watching Marcus conduct what amounted to a quiet but extremely effective interrogation of a man named Derek Cole, who had made a catastrophic business decision, Madeline was sitting across from her mother in the small, bright kitchen of the house in Evanston where she'd grown up. Patricia Hale was 61, trim, practical, with Madeline's same dark eyes, and the specific bearing of a woman who had survived things and emerged from them with her dignity perfectly intact. She had never said, "I told you so" about Ethan, not once in 7 years, and she was not saying it now. She was making tea and listening. "I knew that night," Madeline said. "I was sitting on the floor and I was waiting for him to call, and I knew. Not about that night specifically, about all of it." "What do you know?" Patricia asked. "That I've been disappearing," Madeline said. She didn't cry. She said it the way you say something you've already made peace with. "For years. Slowly. I started—" She stopped. "I used to know things about myself. I used to read and have opinions and be angry about things that mattered. I used to be a person that I recognized." Patricia set the tea in front of her and sat down. "I'm not angry at him anymore," Madeline said. I was furious for a long time. But I'm done being furious. I'm done." "What does done look like?" Patricia asked. Madeline wrapped her hands around the mug. "I need to leave, Mom." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay. I don't want to fight. I don't want a war. I want my kids to have their father. I need to stop waiting for him to remember that I exist." "Okay," Patricia said again. "Can we stay with you, just for a while? Until I figure things out." "You can stay as long as you need." Madeline nodded. She looked out the window at the Evanston yard, the oak tree that had been there her whole life, still holding the last of its October leaves. She thought about Oliver and Charlotte sleeping in their beds in Winnetka, surrounded by all those rooms, that quiet, that expensive, careful nothing. "He's going to try to fix it," she said. "I know," Patricia said. "He always tries to fix things. That's what he does. He'll show up and he'll be so much of what I needed. He'll do all the things I've been asking for, and part of me will want to believe it. But I've been down that road," Madeline said. "I know where it goes." Patricia reached across the table and covered Madeline's hand with her own. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, the way a mother sits when her child is in pain, and the most honest and useful thing she can offer is the fact of her presence. It was the most Madeline had felt held by another person in years. That night, Ethan texted her. "Long day. 8 at the office. Kids okay?" She read it. She put the phone face down on the counter. She went to bed. 2 days passed. Ethan came home to sleep. Late, both nights, the second time past midnight, and left early. He was managing the Derek Cole situation, the fallout from the leak, the careful realignment of the East Side distribution that needed to happen before Federici's people could take advantage of the disruption. He was also seeing Vanessa. Not every night, but enough. On the third morning, Ethan came down to breakfast and found Madeline standing in the kitchen with her phone in her hand and an expression on her face that stopped him in the doorway. She was completely still. She was looking at him with that steadiness, the same steadiness from 3 days ago at the counter, but there was something different in it now. It wasn't the steadiness of a person bracing for impact. It was the steadiness of a person who has already absorbed the impact and is standing on the other side of it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put the phone on the table between them, face up. with the screen displaying the photograph she had found 4 months ago and had been carrying ever since. The photograph was clear. It was unambiguous. It was Ethan and a blonde woman in a restaurant that was not in Chicago, laughing at something, her hand on his arm, his whole body angled toward her in a way that bodies angle toward things they want. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at her. She said, "I've known for 4 months." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not going to yell," she said. I'm done yelling. I just need you to understand something." She picked the phone up and turned it over and set it in her pocket. "I'm done waiting for you to remember you have a family. Madeline." "I'm not finished," she said. Not loud, just final. "You read my SOS and you put the phone down and you chose. I get it. I understand what the choice means. But what I need you to hear, what I really, genuinely need you to hear, is that it wasn't the worst thing you've done." He went very still. "The worst thing," she said, "is that I had to send an SOS at all." She stood up. "I'm taking the kids to my mother's today." "Madeline, you can see them whenever you want," she said. "I will never keep them from you, but I need you to hear what I'm telling you." She picked up her coffee cup, rinsed it at the sink, set it in the rack. Completely steady. "I'm not doing this anymore." She walked out of the kitchen. Ethan sat at the table alone, staring at the place where the phone had been, and felt the first real cold of it move through him. Not panic, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that had the shape of a future he had never actually planned for, arriving all at once with the economy and brutality of a bill come due. He heard her upstairs. Movement. Drawers. Charlotte's voice, then Oliver's. The particular morning sounds of his children waking up in the house he paid for, being packed up by the woman he had left alone in it. He didn't move. By the time he made it to the bottom of the stairs, she was coming down with Charlotte on her hip and a bag over her shoulder. Oliver came behind her with his backpack and his serious face, the face that worried Ethan sometimes because it looked too much like his own. "Daddy," Charlotte said. "Hey, Bug," Ethan said. His voice came out right. He didn't know how. He looked at Madeline. She met his eyes once, steady, clear, finished, and then she looked away and she walked past him to the door, and she opened it, and the October air came in cold and real, and the kids went through it, and then she went through it, and the door closed behind them with a sound that was completely ordinary and somehow the loudest thing Ethan Calloway had ever heard. He stood in the foyer of his 14-room house, alone. The furnace cycled on. The refrigerator hummed. The house made its expensive, impeccable sounds around him, and Ethan stood in the center of all that stillness and understood for the first time with the brutal clarity that only arrives when the thing you've taken for granted actually leaves, that he had broken something that was not going to fix itself. He reached for his phone. He called her. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He sat down on the bottom step of the staircase in his 14-room house and pressed his palm against his mouth and sat with the silence of a home that had, in the span of 30 seconds, stopped being anything other than very expensive real estate. He would fix this. He would call her. He would go there. He would say the things he had never said and mean them in ways he had never allowed himself to mean them. And she would... His phone buzzed. A text. From Madeline. He grabbed it. The message read, "Please don't call again tonight. I need to think. And Ethan, don't come here. I mean that." He stared at the words. Then below them, a second message arrived. "Also, you should probably know who Vanessa Hart actually is." He read it twice. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was not Madeline. It was Marcus Ewan, calling from a number he only used when something had gone critically wrong, calling at 7:40 in the morning, which Marcus had never done before in 11 years. Ethan looked at Madeline's message. He looked at Marcus's incoming call. The cold that had moved through him at the kitchen table arrived now in full, and it was not adjacent to anything. It was the real thing, and it was only just beginning. He answered Marcus's call. Marcus Ewan did not waste words. In 11 years, he had never called Ethan before 8 in the morning, and he had never opened a conversation with what he opened with now, standing somewhere outside by the sound of it. His voice dropped to the register he used when the walls might be listening. "We've got a problem with the Vanessa account." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. He was still sitting on the bottom step of his staircase, the foyer cold and too quiet around him. Madeline's last message still glowing on the screen he'd turned face down against his knee. "What kind of problem?" Ethan said. "The kind I need you to see in person," Marcus said. "Not over the phone." "How bad?" A pause. Marcus never paused. That pause cost Ethan something he couldn't quantify. "Come to the Michigan Avenue office," Marcus said. "I'll have everything laid out. 1 hour." The call ended. Ethan sat on the step for another 30 seconds. The house breathed around him. That expensive, impeccable silence that had felt like peace 6 years ago when he'd bought it and felt now like the inside of something hollow. He picked up his phone and looked at Madeline's message again. "You should probably know who Vanessa Hart actually is." He read it a third time. Then he stood up, went to the kitchen, poured the coffee he didn't want, and drank half of it standing at the counter the way he always stood at counters. Weight forward, eyes moving, body oriented toward the next thing even when the current thing hadn't finished with him yet. He thought about calling her back. He didn't call her back. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the garage door, and he left. The drive to Michigan Avenue took 22 minutes at that hour. Ethan drove it without music, without calls, with both hands on the wheel and his mind running 2 tracks simultaneously the way it always did when things were coming apart at more than one seam. Track 1 was Marcus. Track 2 was Madeline's message, cycling on repeat. That specific construction, "You should probably know who Vanessa Hart actually is," with its implication that Madeline knew something Ethan didn't, which was a category of situation he did not have a comfortable relationship with. He pulled into the parking structure and rode the elevator to 32 and walked through the glass doors into the office that didn't appear in any registry, and Marcus was already there. Already there and already set up, which meant he'd been there for a while. Which meant the problem had been developing for a while, and Ethan felt the first real spike of something that was not adjacent to anything. It was dread, pure and functional and useful if he let it sharpen him rather than slow him down. Marcus was standing at the conference table with a laptop open and 2 folders beside it, and a look on his face that Ethan recognized as the controlled expression of a man delivering information he would personally prefer not to deliver. "Sit down," Marcus said. Ethan sat. Marcus turned the laptop to face him. On the screen was a photograph. Not the kind Madeline had shown him, not a restaurant, not a candid. This was a surveillance photograph, the grainy, high-contrast kind, pulled from what looked like a federal database or something adjacent to one. The woman in it was blonde, sharp cheekbones, green eyes. 7 months ago, Ethan had met her at a gallery opening and thought she was the most interesting woman he'd encountered in years. Under the photograph was a name. The name was not Vanessa Hart. "Her real name is Rebecca Sloan," Marcus said. He pulled the first folder across the table. 41. Born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 2 prior federal indictments, one in 2019 in New York, one in 2021 in Miami, both dropped due to witness issues. She operates under a rotating set of identities, always women with similar demographics, educated, independent, financially self-sufficient on paper. She targets high net worth men in either legitimate or, Marcus paused, or adjacent industries because those men have more to lose by going to law enforcement. Ethan looked at the photograph. "The gallery opening," he said. "Staged. We've confirmed she had a contact inside the venue. She knew you'd be there." Ethan's jaw moved. He looked at the second folder. "Show me." Marcus opened it. Inside were financial documents, wire transfers, account statements, records from 3 different shell companies that Ethan had never heard of, but whose registration documents carried his digital signature. He picked up the first page and his eyes moved down the columns, and what he saw was so clean and so precise that for a moment he just sat with it, not reacting, letting the scale of it settle. Then he said very quietly, "How much?" "Our current estimate," Marcus said, "is between 3 and 4 million. We're still mapping the full structure. She may have accessed more accounts than we've identified." The number sat on the table between them. $4 million was not a catastrophic number for Ethan Calloway's operation. He moved more than that in a decent quarter. But that wasn't the point. The point was the access. The point was that she had been inside his accounts, inside his trust, inside the specific blind spot he'd created by being the kind of man who compartmentalized so completely That the woman he was taking to hotels in Milwaukee hadn't triggered any of the same scrutiny he applied to business contacts. How long did she have access? He said. We think from approximately month 3 of the relationship. She moved slowly. Nothing large enough to flag automated monitoring. Lots of small transfers, all routed through legitimate-looking intermediaries. Marcus closed the folder. She's good, Ethan. This isn't amateur work. She's been doing this for a long time. Where is she now? Gone, Marcus said it flatly, as of 48 hours ago. The number you have for her is disconnected. The apartment she said she owned on North State is leased to a corporate entity that dissolved last week. The car is registered to the same entity. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Madeline knew, he said. Marcus didn't respond to that. She texted me this morning, said I should know who Vanessa Hart actually is. He looked at the photograph on the laptop screen. How did Madeline know before I did? I don't know, Marcus said. That's worth asking. Ethan stood up. He walked to the window. 32 floors below, Michigan Avenue moved with its ordinary morning business. Cabs, pedestrians, a city that had no idea what was happening in this room. He put his hand on the cold glass and looked down at it. He thought about Madeline on the kitchen floor. He thought about the phone face down on the nightstand. He thought about 7 months of hotel rooms and restaurant dinners, and a woman who had laughed at things Ethan said and asked questions that he now understood had been carefully calibrated to extract specific information. And he thought about how good it had felt, being the object of that specific and focused attention, and what that said about what he'd been missing and what he'd done about the missing of it. Find her, he said. We're working on it. Don't involve Federici's people. Don't involve anyone outside our structure. He turned from the window. This stays contained. Understood. Marcus picked up the folders. There's one more thing. Ethan looked at him. The leak from the East Side warehouse. Derek Cole. When we went deeper on his communications, we found contact with a middleman we've traced back to Rebecca Sloan's network. We think the leak and the financial extraction were coordinated. The room was very still. She wasn't just after the money, Ethan said. We don't think so. We think she was also gathering operational intelligence, who you work with, how you move product, the structure of the Federici arrangement. Marcus held his gaze. We don't know yet who she was gathering it for. Ethan nodded once. He picked up his jacket. He moved to the door. And Ethan, Marcus said it to his back. I'm sorry. Ethan stopped. He stood in the doorway for a moment without turning around. Then he said, Find her, and walked out. Sobbed. He drove to Evanston. He knew she'd told him not to. He drove there anyway because there was a part of him that was still running the old operating system. The one that said that showing up, physically showing up, was a form of force, that the weight of his presence would shift things. He had always believed that about himself, that he could walk into situations and change them by being in them. Patricia Hale's house was a modest 2-story on a quiet street with an oak tree in the front yard that was dropping its last leaves across the lawn. Ethan parked at the curb and sat in the car for a moment looking at the house. The lights were on in the kitchen. He could see movement through the window. He got out and walked up the front path and knocked. Madeline answered. She looked at him without surprise, which told him she'd seen the car from the window and had taken the time to decide how she was going to be when she opened the door. She'd decided on still. She was wearing jeans and a dark sweater, and her hair was down, and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, a deeper tired, the kind that accumulates. I told you not to come, she said. I know. The kids are with my mom at the park. I didn't come for the kids. She studied him for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. The house smelled like her mother's cooking and something warm and old and specific. The smell of a place that had been genuinely lived in, that held the texture of actual life rather than the curated emptiness of the estate. It hit Ethan somewhere he hadn't expected. He followed her to the kitchen and she didn't offer him anything and he didn't ask. She stood on one side of the kitchen table. He stood on the other. How did you know about her? He said. Madeline looked at him. Which part? Her real name, Sloan. I hired someone, she said, 3 months ago, when I decided I needed to understand what I was dealing with. He absorbed that. You hired a PI. I hired someone who finds things, she said. Yes. And you sat on it. I needed time to decide what to do with it. You could have told me. She looked at him with something that might have been disbelief if she'd had the energy for it. Ethan, you were sleeping with her. She stole from me. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against the edge of the table. She wasn't who she said she was. She was running a con. She's been doing it for years. She had access to accounts. I know, Madeline said quietly. He looked up. How much do you know? Enough. She pulled out a chair and sat down, not because she was inviting him to sit, but because she was tired of standing. My person found the shell companies 6 weeks ago. I didn't know the full scope, but I knew enough. Why didn't you? He stopped again. He heard how it sounded even as he was saying it. Why didn't you warn me about the woman I was cheating on you with? He heard it and he closed his mouth. Because, Madeline said, reading his face, it wasn't my job. Her voice was flat and deliberate. I am not your intelligence asset, Ethan. I am not your employee. I was your wife, and my wife's job description did not include cleaning up after your affair. The word affair in her mouth had a specific weight that the word hadn't carried before. Denser, more final, like it had been compressed by 4 months of knowing and not saying. Mad. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I'm sorry. I know you are. I mean it. I know that too. She looked at her hands on the table. That's not actually the issue. Then what is the issue? She looked up at him. The issue is that you've been sorry before. The issue is that I've heard I'll do better so many times that it doesn't mean anything anymore. Not because you're lying, but I actually believe you mean it every time. But meaning it and doing it aren't the same thing. And we've had this conversation in enough different forms that I know exactly how it ends. She paused. You go back. Things improve for a while. 3 months, maybe 4. And then the old gravity takes over and you start disappearing again. And I start shrinking again. And we end up back here. Except now I'm on the kitchen floor. He stood across the table from her and he felt things he didn't have adequate language for, which was part of the problem, had always been part of the problem. He felt the specific shame of a man confronting not just what he'd done, but what he'd failed to understand he was doing while he was doing it. The incremental nature of it, the 1,000 small choices that had added up to the shape of a life that had left his wife alone on a kitchen floor, sending 3 letters into silence. I ended it, he said, with her. As of this morning, She's already gone, Ethan. He stopped. She cleaned out and disappeared 48 hours ago, Madeline said. Your person called you this morning because she was already gone. You didn't end anything. She left. The silence that followed was particular. That's not, he started. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said. I'm just telling you the truth, because I think you deserve to hear it plainly. She looked at him with something that wasn't cruelty and wasn't softness, but something precise and exhausted and clear. She used you. She planned it carefully, and she used you, and she left when she had what she needed. And I'm sorry that happened to you. I genuinely am. A beat. But it doesn't change what happened between us. Those are separate things. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. He put both elbows on the table and pressed his hands against his face and stayed like that for a moment, not performing anything, just a man sitting with the accumulated wreckage of a morning that had started with his wife leaving and progressed to this. He could feel the tension in his own jaw, the pressure behind his eyes, the specific exhaustion of a person running on adrenaline and bad coffee, and the dawning understanding that no amount of forward momentum was going to outrun what was behind him. He dropped his hands. What do you want me to do? He said. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Madeline looked at him for a long time. That's the problem, she said finally. I've been telling you what to do for years. I told you I needed you present. I told you I was lonely. I told you I was disappearing. I told you in every way I knew how. Her voice stayed level, but something moved in it, something that had lived under the steadiness all along. I shouldn't have to give you a roadmap to care about your own family, and I'm too tired to keep drawing one. So that's it. I don't know what it is yet. She stood up. I know I need space to figure that out. I know I can't figure it out with you standing in front of me asking me to tell you how to fix it. I can change, Madeline. Maybe you can. She moved to the sink. I hope you do. For Oliver and Charlotte. I genuinely hope you become a different person. She turned on the tap and rinsed her coffee cup with her back to him. But I can't wait around to find out. He sat at the table. He didn't move. Outside, through the kitchen window, he could see the oak tree dropping its last leaves in the October wind. He thought about all the things he could say, all the leverage points he hadn't tried yet, the children, the years, the version of them that had existed before all of this accumulated weight. He thought about deploying them. He had always been good at identifying leverage. He didn't deploy them. He didn't know why, exactly. Maybe because she was looking out the window with her back to him, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that told him it would only confirm everything she already knew about how he operated. Maybe because some part of him, a part that had been very quiet for a very long time, knew she was right. Not about everything, but about enough. He stood up. I'm going to be better, he said. Not because you're watching. Not because I need you to believe me right now. Just because I'm going to be. She didn't turn around. He walked out of the kitchen, through the living room with its modest furniture and its family photographs, and its evidence of a life that had been lived without performance. He opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, and the cold October air hit him flat in the face, and he stood there for a moment with his hand on the door. From down the street he could hear children's voices. He looked, and he could see them. His children. Charlotte running with her arms out like she was flying, Oliver walking beside Patricia with his serious face and his small backpack, coming down the sidewalk toward the house, not yet seeing him, still in that specific happiness of kids who don't know yet that anything is wrong. He watched them for a moment. Charlotte saw him first. "Daddy!" She ran. He went down the porch steps and caught her and held her, and she grabbed his face in both small hands and kissed him on the nose the way she always did, and he squeezed her once, hard, and set her down. Oliver stood a few feet back, watching him with those eyes, Ethan's eyes, in a smaller face. "Hey, bud," Ethan said. "Hi, Dad." Oliver looked at him carefully. "Are you staying?" Ethan looked at him. He looked at his son's careful face and felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not the old reflexive thing, not the managed version of emotion he deployed in calculated moments, but the real and raw and unmanaged thing, the thing that had no use and no strategy attached to it. "Not today," Ethan said. Oliver nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. That nod, that small, prepared, already adjusted nod, hit Ethan harder than anything else that morning had hit him. He stayed for 20 minutes. He sat on the porch with Charlotte in his lap and Oliver beside him and said nothing about anything that mattered and tried to be fully present in those 20 minutes in a way he hadn't been in years. When he left, he hugged them both and told them he'd see them in a few days and walked to his car without looking back at the house, because he knew if he looked back, he would see Madeline watching from the window, and he didn't know what he would do with that. He sat in the car, his phone buzzed. "Marcus." He answered. "We found something in Rebecca Sloane's background," Marcus said. "Something that changes the picture." "Tell me." "She wasn't working alone. The financial extraction. It's too clean for one person. She had a handler, someone local who was feeding her information about our structure before she made contact with you." A pause. "Someone who knew you well enough to know exactly which blind spots to aim her at." Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. "We've got a name," Marcus said. "You're not going to like it." "Tell me the name, Marcus," Marcus told him. Ethan sat with it for a moment. He sat with it and felt the cold come back, different this time. Not the cold of a man losing his family, but the cold of a man realizing the betrayal went so much deeper than he'd understood, that what he'd thought was a con by a single opportunistic woman was something organized and deliberate and aimed directly at the center of everything he'd built. "How sure are you?" Ethan said. "Sure enough," Marcus said. Ethan started the car. The name Marcus had given him belonged to someone Ethan had trusted for 8 years. Someone who had sat at his table, eaten his food, managed pieces of his operation that no one outside the innermost circle had access to. Someone who had been inside the whole. The name was Daniel Rourke. Ethan sat in the car outside Patricia Hale's house on that quiet Evanston street, with the engine running and the heat on and the name sitting in his chest like something that had been swallowed wrong. 8 years. Daniel Rourke had been with him for 8 years, longer than the estate, longer than Oliver, longer than most of the current structure of Callaway Capital in either of its forms. He had been there when Ethan was building, when the operation was smaller and more exposed and required the kind of trust that you extended to very few people because extending it to the wrong one could end everything. Ethan had extended it to Daniel Rourke. "How did you find it?" Ethan said. "Derek Cole," Marcus said over the phone. "When we went deeper on his communications after the warehouse situation, we found an encrypted channel. It took our guy 2 days to crack the routing. The channel connects Cole to a cutout, and the cutout connects back to a number that traces to a burner purchased in March. The same burner sent 14 messages to a number we've confirmed was used by Rebecca Sloan before she went dark." "That's the chain," Ethan said. "That's not Rourke." "The burner was purchased at a convenience store on West Addison," Marcus said. "We pulled the security footage. It's him, Ethan. It's Daniel." The heat in the car felt wrong, too warm. Ethan reached over and turned it down. "When?" he said. "The purchase was in March, which puts the beginning of the coordination approximately 4 months before Sloan made contact with you at the gallery." A pause. "He planned the introduction. He knew your schedule, knew you'd be at the Whitmore Gallery opening, knew the kind of woman you'd respond to. He gave her the profile." Ethan's hand on the steering wheel was completely still. He was aware of it being still the way you become aware of your own heartbeat when the room goes quiet. Noticing the thing precisely because it was working against its own nature, because every instinct in his body wanted to move and he was holding it down. "Where is he now?" Ethan said. "Office," Marcus said. "He came in at 8:30 like always. He's been in his office all morning. He doesn't know we know." "Keep it that way," Ethan said. "Don't approach him. Don't change anything. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call. He sat for 10 more seconds, looking at the oak tree in Patricia Hale's front yard, its branches stripped nearly bare now, the last few leaves hanging on against the wind with the specific stubbornness of things that haven't yet accepted the season. Then he pulled away from the curb and drove. He used the 30 minutes to build the structure of it in his mind, which was what he always did with information that had the potential to destabilize him. He built the architecture of it deliberately, placed each fact in relation to the others, identified the load-bearing elements and the ones that were still uncertain. It was the same process he applied to everything. It had kept him functional through things that would have broken other men. Daniel Rourke, 53 years old. Originally from South Boston, had moved to Chicago in his late 30s after a career in private security that had given him a particular set of skills and a particular understanding of how operations like Ethan's actually functioned at the structural level. He was methodical, quiet in social situations, had a dry humor that emerged only in small groups. He was divorced, no children, lived alone in a condo in Lincoln Park. He'd been Ethan's head of internal security for 8 years, which meant he knew the location of every vulnerability in Callaway's operation, every protected asset, every relationship and arrangement that depended on not being exposed. He had given all of that to Rebecca Sloan, who had given it to someone else. Because Marcus was right. This was too clean for a freelance operation. There was money and direction behind it that suggested a client, someone who wanted what Rourke knew and was willing to pay a professional like Sloan to extract it through a channel that kept the client invisible. Ethan thought about Federici. He didn't want to think about Federici, but the geometry of it kept pointing south. He parked in the structure and rode the elevator to 32 and walked through the glass doors and past the assistant who said good morning, and he said good morning back without breaking stride. He went to his office first, sat behind his desk, poured water from the carafe his assistant always left on the credenza, drank half of it. Then he called Daniel Rourke's extension. "Come to my office," he said when Rourke picked up. "Now." A brief pause. "Sure, give me 2 minutes." "Now, Daniel." He hung up. But sold. Rourke came through the door 90 seconds later, which told Ethan he'd moved fast, which told Ethan something was already working in Rourke's nervous system, some alarm that had been tripped by the flatness in Ethan's voice. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had always read as calm in the way that faces read as calm when the person behind them has spent decades managing the presentation. He was wearing a gray jacket and carrying a coffee mug, and he came through the door with his usual measured step, and then he read the room. The room was just Ethan behind the desk. No Marcus, no one else. That was the tell for Rourke, Ethan suspected. The absence of Marcus, who was usually present for anything serious. Rourke sat down in the chair across the desk. He put his coffee mug on the edge of the desk. He looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Ethan had learned long ago that silence was a tool, that most people could not tolerate extended silence and would fill it with something, and that the something they chose to fill it with was almost always useful information. He waited. Rourke said, "What's going on?" Not a question. The intonation was flat. The intonation of a man who already knows something is wrong and is choosing his posture before he knows the shape of what's coming. "West Addison," Ethan said. "March 15th, convenience store." Something moved in Rourke's face. It was very small and it was very fast, and Ethan almost missed it. But he'd been watching for it and he didn't miss it. "Don't know what you're talking about," Rourke said. "You bought a burner," Ethan said. "You used it to coordinate with a cutout that connected to Rebecca Sloan." He paused. "Her real name is Rebecca Sloan. The woman you introduced me to through a gallery opening you knew I'd attend. The woman you profiled for her, told her who I was, what I responded to, where my blind spots were." Rourke picked up his coffee mug. He held it in both hands. He did not drink from it. "That's a significant accusation," he said. "It's not an accusation," Ethan said. "I have the security footage. I have the phone records. I have Derek Cole's full communication chain, which I'm sure you knew was a risk when you brought him into it, and I'm sure you figured Cole was small enough that if he got pulled, he wouldn't have enough to lead back to you." He kept his voice completely level. "He had enough." Rourke set the mug down. For a moment, the office was so quiet, Ethan could hear the building's ventilation system. 32 floors below, Michigan Avenue went about its business, indifferent. "I want to understand something," Ethan said. "Before anything else. I want to understand who you were feeding it to." Rourke looked at him. "Because the money she took? That's one thing. That's recoverable. What she took out of here in operational intelligence," Ethan stopped. "That's not recoverable. Whoever has that information now has the map of everything I've built. Every arrangement, every protected channel, every understanding with Federici." He leaned forward slightly. "So I need to know who has it. Because that's the thing that can end me, not the money." Rourke was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want an arrangement." Ethan looked at him. "Before I tell you anything, I want a guarantee. Safe passage." "No." "Daniel," Ethan's voice was soft, "you don't have the leverage for an arrangement. You understand that. The only thing you have is the name, and the name is useful to me right now, which is the only reason we're having this conversation in this format instead of another format." A beat. "Tell me who." Rourke looked at the desk. He looked at his hands. He was breathing in a specific way, controlled, through the nose, the kind of breathing that people do when they are managing something large. Ethan watched his chest move and recognized the effort in it. "It wasn't Federici," Rourke said. Ethan said nothing. "I know that's what you're thinking. It wasn't him." Rourke looked up. "It was Carver." The name landed differently than Federici would have, worse in a specific way. James Carver was not a name in Ethan's organization. James Carver was a name from 8 years ago, from the period before Callaway Capital had fully solidified, when Ethan was navigating the transition from a smaller and more exposed operation to the structure he now ran, and James Carver had been a financial backer and a strategic ally, and then had become a problem that Ethan had resolved by cutting him out of the arrangement entirely and absorbing the assets Carver had been managing. He had resolved it cleanly. He had believed he'd resolved it completely. "Carver's been in Miami for 6 years, Ethan said. "He has," Rourke said. "He's been patient." Ethan sat back in his chair. The architecture he'd been building in his mind for the past 30 minutes reconfigured itself with the new load-bearing element in place, and what it revealed was worse than Federici would have been. Federici was a known quantity, a managed tension, a détente that both sides had incentive to maintain. Carver was different. Carver had a grievance. Carver had been removed from something he believed was his, and had apparently spent 6 years in Miami building the patience and the resources and the specific plan to dismantle what had been built without him. Rebecca Sloan had not been a con artist who happened to target Ethan. She had been a weapon, aimed at him, by a man who had spent 6 years waiting to pull the trigger. What does he have? Ethan said. Everything Sloan extracted, Rourke said. The financial records, the account structures, the shell companies, the distribution chain and the Federici arrangement in enough detail that he stopped. That what? That Carver can use it as leverage with Federici directly, Rourke said. He can go to Federici and show him proof that you've been... There are things in those records, Ethan, that read in a certain way if you present them without context. Things that look like you've been skimming from the arrangement, taking percentages that weren't agreed to. He held Ethan's gaze. I helped structure some of those records to read that way. That was part of what I was paid to do. The office was very quiet. Ethan looked at Daniel Rourke, this man he had trusted for 8 years, this man who had eaten at his table and played with his children when they were small and stood beside him at moments of real vulnerability when the operation was exposed and could have gone wrong, and felt something that was not anger. Anger was too simple for it. What he felt was the specific devastation of a man confronting the fact that his ability to read people, which he had always believed was one of the few things he could genuinely trust about himself, had failed him so completely and for so long. He stood up. He walked to the window. He put both hands flat on the glass and looked down at Michigan Avenue and breathed. How long? He said. Carver approached me 14 months ago, Rourke said behind him. 14 months. Rourke had been working against him for 14 months. Every meeting, every briefing, every moment in which Ethan had included him in the innermost circle of what was happening, 14 months of that, all of it fed through to Carver in Miami, all of it accumulating into the weapon that was now pointed at the Federici arrangement, and by extension, at the entire structure of everything Ethan had built. Get out of my office, Ethan said. Ethan, I said get out. A pause. The sound of the chair moving. Footsteps. The door opened. I didn't want it to go this far, Rourke said from the doorway. I want you to know that. It started as information. It wasn't supposed to. Daniel. Ethan didn't turn around. If you say one more word, I will not be responsible for what happens next. Get out of my office and don't leave the building. The door closed. Ethan stood at the window with his hands on the glass and his forehead almost touching it and breathed. In and out. Slow. The way you breathe when you are preventing something. When you are holding the functional part of yourself together by force of will, because the alternative is to let the weight of it fully land. And if it fully lands right now, in this office, on this day when his wife has left, and his security chief has been working against him for over a year, and a man from 8 years ago has rebuilt himself into an existential threat. If it fully lands right now, he doesn't know what's left standing. He breathed. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. Rourke confirmed it, he said. It's Carver. Marcus was quiet for 2 seconds. James Carver. He's been building this for over a year. He's using Sloan's extraction to go to Federici with fabricated evidence that I've been skimming. Ethan pressed his thumb and forefinger against his eyes. We have maybe 72 hours before Carver makes contact with Federici. If he gets to Federici first with those records, Federici ends the arrangement, Marcus said, and doesn't stop there. No, Ethan said. He doesn't stop there. Anthony Federici was not a man who responded to perceived betrayal with negotiation. The arrangement between them had always been built on a specific foundation, mutual advantage maintained by mutual respect, maintained by the implicit understanding that crossing it meant consequences that went well beyond financial. If Carver reached Federici with documents that made it look like Ethan had been stealing from him for years, Federici would not ask for clarification. What do you need? Marcus said. I need to know where Carver is physically. I need to know his movement pattern in Miami. And I need to know if Sloan is still connected to him or if he's cut her loose. Ethan turned from the window. And I need you to find out who else in our structure Rourke may have compromised. Assume everyone until we've verified otherwise. That's going to create... I know what it's going to create. Do it anyway. He hung up. He sat back down at his desk. He looked at the surface of it. The clean, organized surface that his assistant maintained, the coffee carafe, the notepad with his own handwriting on it from this morning, which had been a different morning, the morning before he knew about Rourke, before he knew about Carver, before the full shape of what had been done to him had become visible. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't open it. He opened it. The message was 3 sentences. No greeting, no signature. The documents went to Federici this morning, earlier than you think. You have less time than Marcus told you. He stared at the message. He called Marcus back immediately. The documents, he said when Marcus picked up. Did Carver send them already? What? We assessed 72... Someone just texted me from an unknown number telling me they went to Federici this morning. A sharp silence. Then he heard Marcus moving, the sound of rapid keyboard input, a door opening and closing. Give me 10 minutes. I don't have 10 minutes, Marcus. 8. Give me 8. He sat at the desk and waited, and the 8 minutes were the longest 8 minutes he had spent in years, longer than the 45 minutes Madeline had spent on the kitchen floor, because at least then he hadn't known. At least then he'd had the insulation of ignorance. Now he sat with full knowledge and no viable move, and the specific paralysis of a man whose operational instinct, always move, always have the next action ready, had run into a situation where the next action was not clear. His phone rang. Marcus. It's confirmed, Marcus said, and his voice had a quality Ethan had never heard in it before. Not panic. Marcus didn't panic, but something close to it, some controlled cousin of panic. Federici's organization received a package this morning, courier. Our contact inside confirmed it 20 minutes ago and didn't escalate it immediately because it doesn't matter why. It's confirmed. Ethan was already standing. There's something else, Marcus said. Tell me. The unknown number that texted you. We ran it. It's a number that was used by Rebecca Sloane's network. A pause. We think she sent it. Why would she warn me? I don't know. Maybe Carver cut her out and she's making a move. Maybe it's a different kind of play. Maybe... Ethan, I don't know, but the number is hers. He stood in the center of his office. This office on the 32nd floor, this room that represented the legitimate face of everything he'd built. And he understood with complete clarity that the situation had moved beyond the kind of problem he solved with intelligence and positioning. The documents were already with Federici. The fabricated evidence was already in the hands of the one person whose response to it could not be managed with a phone call or a meeting or the careful deployment of mutual advantage. Federici would already be making decisions. And somewhere, in the architecture of those decisions, was a version of the next few days in which Ethan Calloway did not come through intact. His phone rang again. He looked at the screen. The number was one he recognized immediately. A number he had not called or received a call from in 8 years. A number he had believed was gone from the world of things he needed to think about. James Carver was calling him directly. Ethan looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at Carver's number on the screen. The phone rang a second time, a third. He thought about letting it go to voicemail, thought about it for the length of one ring, and then he answered it, because the alternative was to let the man who had orchestrated this entire thing have the additional advantage of choosing the timing, and whatever else was gone, Ethan was not ready to hand over control of the conversation to Ethan, Carver said. His voice had not changed in 8 years. That was the first thing Ethan registered. The specific quality of it, unhurried and slightly warm in the way that certain dangerous men are warm, the warmth of someone who has decided the outcome already and is enjoying the formality of the conversation that precedes it. James Carver had always sounded like a man arriving at a meeting he'd called, even when someone else had called it. James, Ethan said, I imagine this morning has been difficult. Ethan walked to the window. He stood with his back to the room and looked out at Michigan Avenue and kept his voice at the same temperature as Carver's. Tell me what you want. What I want, Carver said. That's direct. I appreciate that about you, Ethan. Always did. A pause that had nothing accidental in it. I want the East Side distribution, the full chain, transferred to my operation. And I want the Federici arrangement restructured to include me as an equal partner. And in exchange, I tell Federici the documents were fabricated. I correct the record. You keep your arrangement intact and we move forward as partners. Another pause. Or Federici hears nothing from me and draws his own conclusions from the documentation he received this morning. And we both know how Anthony processes that kind of information. Ethan's reflection was faint in the glass. He could see himself, jacket, jaw set, phone pressed to his ear. And he looked like a man who was holding something together by the specific force of not letting his face show what was happening underneath it. I need 24 hours, Ethan said. You have 12, Carver said. Call me by 9 tonight. After that, the conversation becomes irrelevant. The warmth in his voice didn't change. I'm sorry it came to this. I want you to know I mean that. No, you don't, Ethan said. A brief silence, then something that might have been a genuine laugh. No, I don't. The line went dead. Ethan stood at the window. 12 hours. He turned and walked out of his office and down the hallway and into the conference room where Marcus was already set up with 2 laptops and a phone on speaker and the controlled urgency of a man running multiple tracks simultaneously. There were 2 other men in the room, Vincent Cho, who handled the financial architecture of the operation, and a man named Priest who handled things that didn't have clean titles. Ethan looked at the 3 of them and said, Carver wants the East Side chain and a seat at the Federici table. I have until 9 tonight. Marcus said, You're not giving him either. No, Ethan said. I'm not. He pulled out a chair and sat. So we need another way to reach Federici before Carver does. Not through an intermediary, directly. Federici doesn't take direct contact outside of scheduled. I know what Federici takes, Ethan said. Someone in this room has a number that gets us past the scheduler. Use it. Marcus and Vincent exchanged a look. It was Priest who spoke. A man of approximately 50, who had a quality of utter stillness that most people found unsettling and Ethan had always found useful. I have a number, Priest said. It'll cost something to use it. Use it, Ethan said. Priest picked up his phone and left the room. Ethan looked at Vincent. The documents Carver sent. How bad is the fabrication? Vincent pulled a folder across the table. He was younger than the others, Korean-American, meticulous in a way that manifested physically in how he organized his workspace, everything parallel, everything at right angles. He opened the folder and turned it toward Ethan. They took real transaction records and altered the percentage breakdowns. If you look at the raw numbers without context, it reads like you've been retaining an additional 6% of the arrangement revenue going back 4 years. He pointed to a column. The fabrication is good. The numbers are internally consistent. Someone who understands financial architecture built this. Rourke, Ethan said. Has to be. Vincent closed the folder. The good news is that the original records exist. We can demonstrate the fabrication. The bad news is that demonstrating it requires Federici to be willing to look at our counter documentation, which requires him to not have already made a decision. How long does Federici typically take to act on something like this? Vincent looked at Marcus. 24 to 48 hours, Marcus said. He's deliberate. He won't move without being certain, which means we have a window, but it's... The conference room door opened and Priest came back in. He stood in the doorway with his phone still in his hand and said, Federici will meet tonight, 9 o'clock, his restaurant in Bridgeport. The room went quiet. 9 o'clock was Carver's deadline. He set the time, Priest said, non-negotiable. Ethan looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:47 in the morning. 9 hours and 13 minutes. Tell him we'll be there, Ethan said. The next 8 hours were the most concentrated work Ethan had done in years. He and Vincent spent 3 hours with the original financial records, building the counter documentation, a clean source demonstration of where Carver's fabrication had altered the actual numbers, with a paper trail that traced the alterations back to their origin. It was meticulous, grinding work, the kind that required complete focus, and produced a specific variety of exhaustion, the exhaustion of sustained precision under pressure. Ethan's eyes ached by mid-afternoon. He drank coffee he didn't taste and ate half a sandwich that Vincent's assistant brought in and kept working. Marcus ran a parallel track, locating Carver physically, mapping his current operation, trying to identify the full scope of what Rourke had fed him over 14 months. What they found was not reassuring. Carver had rebuilt himself significantly in 6 years. Miami had been good to him. He had financial backing that appeared legitimate on the surface and wasn't, a small but effective organization, and the patience of the man who had spent 6 years planning a single move and executing it without hurry. He was not someone who could be pressured into retreat, which meant the meeting with Federici was the only real play. At 4 in the afternoon, Ethan's phone rang. Madeline. He stared at it for 2 rings. Sitting at the conference table surrounded by financial documents and the controlled tension of men managing an emergency. And then he answered it, stepping into the hallway. "Hey," he said. "Are you okay?" she said. Not warm, exactly, but asking the question genuinely, which was something. He stopped. "How did you know?" "Oliver saw something on your face this morning when you left. He's been worried." A pause. "So have I, honestly." He leaned against the hallway wall. The fluorescent light above him hummed. "Things are complicated," he said. "The situation with Vanessa, it's bigger than we thought. There are people involved who—" He stopped again. "I can't give you details. I don't want to put that on you." "Are you safe?" she said. The question landed in a specific way. Not is the operation safe, or is the money safe? Are you safe? The personal pronoun and the personal question from the woman who had walked out of his house that morning with their children and told him not to call, who had apparently, in the hours since, found room for this. "I think so," he said. "I have a meeting tonight that needs to go right." "Ethan," her voice changed slightly, "be careful." "I will." A silence that had texture. Then she said, "The kids want to call you tonight, before bed. Tell them I'll call at 7:30. "Okay." Another pause. "Okay." And she was gone. He stood in the hallway for a moment with the dead phone against his ear. Then he went back into the conference room and worked. They left for Bridgeport at 8:15. Ethan, Marcus, and Priest. 3 men in a black car moving south through Chicago at night, the city refracting off the wet streets in orange and white, the kind of night that makes the city look like a different place than it is in daylight. Ethan sat in the back with the counter documentation in a leather folder on his knee and his hands very still, and his mind running the meeting in advance. Every possible version of it, every angle Federici might come from, every place where it could go wrong and what the response to wrong looked like. He had called Oliver and Charlotte at 7:30. Oliver had told him about a math test. Charlotte had told him, at some length, about a disagreement with a girl at her grandmother's park who had refused to share the swing. Ethan had listened to both of them with a completeness of attention that had nothing performed about it, and when he hung up he had sat alone in the conference room for 4 minutes doing nothing, and then he had put the phone away and returned to the work. He thought about that now, in the back of the car, the 4 minutes of nothing. He thought about what it meant that those 4 minutes had been the steadiest he'd felt all day. The car stopped outside Federici's restaurant at 8:52. The place was closed to the public on Monday nights. Through the dark glass of the front window, Ethan could see lights on in the back. "Wait here," Ethan told Marcus and Priest. Marcus looked at him. "Ethan." He agreed to a one-on-one. If I walk in there with backup, it reads as distrust. He held Marcus's gaze. "If I'm not out in 90 minutes, do whatever you think is right." He got out of the car. Anthony Federici was 63 years old and looked like someone's grandfather if you didn't look at his eyes. He was compact, gray-haired, immaculately dressed, even at 9 on a Monday night, sitting at a corner table in his own restaurant with a glass of red wine and a posture of complete relaxation. The restaurant was empty except for a man near the kitchen door who was not a waiter, and one more near the front who had watched Ethan walk in with the specific attention of a man cataloging whether he was carrying anything. Ethan sat down across from Federici without being invited. Federici looked at him. "You requested an urgent meeting," Federici said. His voice was even, slightly formal, with the trace of a Chicago accent worn down by decades of effort. "I did," Ethan said. "I appreciate you agreeing to it. I haven't decided yet whether I'm glad I did." Federici picked up his wine glass and looked at it rather than at Ethan. "I received some interesting documents this morning." "I know," Ethan said. "I'd like to show you where those documents diverge from the actual records." He opened the leather folder and placed the counter documentation on the table, turned so it faced Federici. He didn't push it across. He set it down and waited. He was aware of the man near the kitchen door shifting slightly. He was aware of his own heartbeat, which was faster than he would have preferred, and of the specific effort of sitting still in his body while his nervous system ran at a frequency that wanted movement, wanted action, wanted anything other than this stillness, this patience, this complete dependence on another man's willingness to look at a piece of paper and be persuaded by what it said. Federici looked at the documents on the table. He didn't touch them yet. The men who brought me the documents this morning, Federici said, told me a story about 6 years of skimming, about a man I've done business with who has been taking from our arrangement while presenting himself as an honest partner. He finally looked at Ethan directly. That kind of story makes me feel a specific way. I understand, Ethan said. The story is fabricated. The documents in front of you show where the alterations were made and trace them back to their source. He kept his voice level. The man who built those fabricated documents is named Daniel Rourke. He worked for me for 8 years and spent the last 14 months feeding information to a man named James Carver, who used it to construct a false narrative designed to end our arrangement. Federici was quiet. Carver was removed from a position in my operation 8 years ago, Ethan said. He built this to come back, not to restore something, to take something. He tapped the edge of the counter documentation. Everything you need to verify what I'm telling you is here. A long silence. Federici reached out and picked up the top page. He read it. He read the second page. He did not read quickly. He read with the care of a man who had not gotten to where he was by accepting anything at face value. Ethan sat across from him and did not speak and did not look away and kept his breathing steady through the simple mechanical effort of expanding his chest and releasing it, expanding and releasing. The most basic thing a body does, and the thing that required the most deliberate attention when everything else was running at maximum. Then his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He didn't reach for it. It buzzed again. Federici looked up from the documents. "Answer it," Federici said. Ethan reached into his pocket and looked at the screen. Unknown number. The same unknown number that had texted him earlier. Sloan's network number. He looked at it and felt the specific unease of a variable he couldn't place, inserting itself at exactly the worst moment. He answered it. "Don't show Federici the counter documentation." Rebecca Sloan's voice, low and controlled, with the particular quality of someone speaking quickly in a space where they needed to be quiet. The alterations, Rourke built a second layer. If Federici runs verification on those documents, it'll look like you fabricated the counter evidence. Carver anticipated the counter move. He built it to fail. Ethan kept his face completely still. "The real proof isn't in the financials," she said. "It's the burner phone, the one Rourke used. Carver still has it. It has the full communication chain, everything Rourke sent him, everything I sent, including the fabrication instructions." A beat. "I can get it to you, but it has to be now. It has to be before Federici finishes reading." "Why?" Ethan said. One word. "Because Carver cut me out," she said, "and I don't lose quietly." The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone. He looked at Federici across the table. Federici was watching him with the patient, measuring attention of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms like this, reading faces for information. "Problem?" Federici said. Ethan made a decision in the space of 2 seconds. The kind of decision that couldn't be walked back. That committed him fully to a course of action with an unknown variable at its center, that required him to trust the word of a woman who had spent 7 months running a sophisticated con on him, and had just called him from a ghost number with information that could be genuine or could be the second layer of a trap he hadn't mapped yet. He reached across the table and pulled the counter documentation back. Federici raised an eyebrow. "I need 45 minutes, Ethan said. "There's additional evidence that supersedes what I brought. A primary source that makes everything else unnecessary." He held Federici's gaze. 45 minutes. Then I'll show you something that ends this conversation completely." Federici looked at him for a long, still moment. 45 minutes, Federici said. "Then we finish this, one way or another." Ethan stood up and walked to the front of the restaurant. He pushed through the door and hit the cold air and was moving before it closed behind him, pulling out his phone, calling Marcus before he reached the car. "I need Carver's location," he said when Marcus picked up. "Right now, tonight. Where is he physically?" "Ethan, Sloan called me. She says Carver has a burner phone with the full communication chain that proves the fabrication. She says she can get it to us. I need to know if Carver's in Chicago." "Hold on." The sound of Marcus moving fast. "Hold on." Ethan reached the car. He yanked the door open. Priest looked at him. "We're moving," Ethan said. "The meeting. 45 minutes. Drive." He was already dialing a second number as Priest started the engine. The unknown number, Sloan's number. And it rang twice and she answered and he said, "Tell me where you are." And she told him, and the address she gave was 12 minutes away in River North. And he said, "Don't move," and ended the call. Marcus came back on. "Carver's in Chicago. He flew in this morning. We have him at a hotel in the Gold Coast, the Remington, on Delaware. He came to watch it happen in person," Ethan said. "Looks that way. I need someone at the Remington, not to touch him, just to watch him. If he moves toward Bridgeport, I need to know immediately." "Done." A pause. "Ethan, what are you doing?" "I'm betting everything on a woman who stole $4 million from me and just called me out of nowhere with information that might save my life." He looked out the window at the wet Chicago streets. "It's that kind of night." "That's insane." "Yes," Ethan said. "Drive faster." The address Sloan had given him was a parking structure in River North, 3rd level, northwest corner. When the car pulled up the ramp and the headlights swept across the concrete, Ethan saw her immediately, standing against the far wall, arms crossed, wearing a dark coat, her blonde hair pulled back. She looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe it was that the controlled allure of Vanessa Hart was gone, the careful construction of it, the warmth engineered for his specific consumption, and what was left was just a woman standing in a parking structure at night who had made a calculation and was following it through. He got out of the car alone. He walked toward her across the oil-stained concrete, and the distance between them was 40 feet, then 20, then 10, and when he stopped, he was close enough to read her face in the harsh overhead light, and what he read there was not remorse and was not fear. It was the calculating steadiness of someone running numbers in real time. "The phone," he said. She reached into her coat pocket and held it up, a standard burner, the cheap prepaid kind, in a clear plastic bag. "Everything is on here," she said. Rourke's messages to Carver, Carver's instructions to Rourke, the fabrication methodology, timestamps that predate the documents Carver sent to Federici by 3 months. She held it out. He didn't take it yet. "Why?" he said. "I told you. Carver is... You told me Carver cut you out. That's a reason to go after Carver. It's not a reason to help me." He looked at her, at the face he'd spent 7 months reading wrong. "So why?" Something shifted in her expression. A small movement, quickly controlled. "Because he told me the target was limited," she said. "Financial extraction, intelligence gathering. He said no one was going to get hurt. He said..." She stopped. "He sent people to my apartment 2 days ago, when I asked for my full payment." Her jaw tightened slightly. "It became a different situation. So this is self-preservation." "Yes," she said, with a flatness that was almost refreshing in its honesty. "Don't make it into something else. It's self-preservation. But the phone is real. The evidence is real. And if you go back to Federici with this, you end it tonight." He looked at the phone in the plastic bag. He thought about the second layer Sloan had warned him about, the possibility that Carver had anticipated the counter-documentation. He thought about what it meant to trust this, to take the phone from her hand and carry it back to Bridgeport and put it in front of Federici and stake everything on its contents being exactly what she said. He thought about the kitchen floor. He thought about Oliver's prepared nod on the porch steps, already adjusted, already expecting the answer he didn't want. He thought about the man he had been for the last several years, moving, always choosing the forward momentum over the thing that required him to stop and be still and take the risk of being present to something that could hurt him. He took the phone. "Where will you go?" he said. "Somewhere Carver isn't," she said. "That's all you need to know." He looked at her for a moment. "The $4 million?" She met his eyes. "Consider it the cost of finding out who Rourke was." No apology in it, no performance. He turned and walked back to the car. "Ethan," she said behind him. He stopped but didn't turn. "Your wife," she said. "I read her profile when Rourke gave it to me, the full workup he did on your personal life." A beat. "She was the most real thing in your file. I want you to know I noticed that, even then." He stood still for 1 second, then he got in the car. "Bridgeport," he said. "Now." Priest floored it. The car descended the ramp and hit the street and moved south through the wet Chicago night, and Ethan sat in the back with the burner phone in his hand and his blood running at a speed he could feel in his fingertips and the clock in his head counting down the remaining minutes of Federici's 45. His phone buzzed. "Marcus." Carver just left the Remington, Marcus said. He's in a car. He's moving south. South meant Bridgeport. Carver was heading to Federici directly. How far behind us? Ethan said. 8 minutes, maybe 10. Can you slow him down? A pause. Probably. Do it, Ethan said. I need 7 minutes inside before he gets there. I'll get you 7, Marcus said. The car hit the expressway and the city opened up on both sides, and Ethan looked at the burner phone in his hand and thought about what happened in the next 20 minutes. Not in the way he usually thought about things, not the analytical architecture building, but something rawer than that. Something that had more to do with the accumulated weight of the day, the year, the slow erosion of the version of himself he'd once believed in. He thought about what it meant that it had come to this. A parking structure in River North. A woman who'd robbed him, handing him the thing that might save him. A car moving south through Chicago at 11 minutes to 9, with everything staked on a burner phone and 7 minutes. He thought, if this works, something has to change. Not I'll do better. Not the temporary recalibration that faded back to the old gravity after 3 months. Something structural. Something that started tonight, win or lose, and did not depend on Madeline coming back or the operation surviving or any external validation at all. Something that started because he'd sat on the floor, metaphorically, tonight, and understood for the first time what it cost to keep moving when you should have stopped. The car pulled off the expressway. 4 minutes to Bridgeport. Priest said, "We're going to make it." Ethan looked at the phone. He thought about Federici's face across the table, the patience in it, the 40 years of reading rooms and people and situations and making decisions that landed correctly because they were grounded in something real. He thought about James Carver, 8 minutes behind him, in the dark, moving toward the same room, carrying the confidence of a man who had planned this for 6 years and watched it execute perfectly and was now arriving to witness the conclusion. His phone buzzed one more time. Not Marcus. Not an unknown number. Madeline. A text. 4 words. Be careful tonight. Please. He looked at those 4 words in the back of the car as Bridgeport came up in the windshield and the restaurant lights appeared through the wet glass, and Priest slowed and Ethan gripped the phone, both phones, the burner, and his own, and felt the specific weight of everything that had been broken and everything that might still be. Ethan walked into Federici's restaurant at 2 minutes to 9. The front door was unlocked. He pushed through it, and the warmth of the restaurant interior hit him after the cold of the street, and he moved through it without pausing, past the empty tables with their upturned chairs, past the bar with its low amber lighting, toward the back corner where Federici was still sitting exactly as Ethan had left him. Wine glass, straight posture, the patience of a man who had agreed to 45 minutes and was prepared to hold the line on that to the second. The man near the kitchen door tracked Ethan's movement. The man near the front watched him come in. Neither moved. Ethan sat down. He placed the burner phone in its clear plastic bag on the table between them. Federici looked at it. "What is this?" Federici said. "Primary source," Ethan said. His voice was steady. His hands were steady. Everything was steady, in the specific way that things are steady when the alternative is to let the shake show, and he was not going to let the shake show in this room, not in front of this man, not tonight. The communication chain between Daniel Rourke, who was my head of internal security, and James Carver. 14 months of correspondence, including the specific instructions Carver gave Rourke for fabricating the documents you received this morning. Federici looked at the phone for a long moment without touching it. Then he looked at Ethan. "Why a burner phone?" he said. Because Rourke was careful. He used encrypted channels routed through disposable hardware. He thought the chain was clean. Ethan paused. He didn't account for Carver being the kind of man who burns his partners when he's done with them. The woman Carver used to run the operation against me, she was sitting on this as insurance. When Carver moved against her, she used it. And she gave it to you. Yes. Why would she do that? Self-preservation, Ethan said. She was honest about that. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself from Carver. I was the instrument of that. Federici was quiet for a moment. He looked at the phone. He looked at Ethan. Carver is on his way here, Ethan said. He flew in this morning to watch. He'll be here in the next few minutes. Something moved in Federici's eyes. Not surprise. The man didn't do surprise, but a recalibration, subtle and rapid. He was going to arrive after you'd made your decision, Ethan said, to confirm the outcome. That's the kind of man he is. He plans far enough ahead to be present at the ending. Ethan held Federici's gaze. I'm asking you to look at what's on that phone before he walks through the door. That's all I'm asking. Federici looked at him for a long, still moment. Then he picked up the burner phone. He looked at it through the plastic bag. He looked at his man near the kitchen door and made a small gesture. The man came forward and Federici handed him the phone, and the man took it out of the bag with practiced care and unlocked it. It wasn't locked. Sloan had made sure of that, and held it so Federici could see the screen. The restaurant was absolutely quiet. Federici read. He read slowly and he read carefully, and Ethan sat across the table from him and did not speak and did not move. And the minutes passed with the specific weight of minutes that are determining something irreversible. Ethan's heartbeat was elevated and steady, the rhythm of a man who has done everything he can do and is now at the boundary of his own agency, in the territory where outcomes are decided by things outside himself. He thought about Madeline's text. 4 words. Be careful tonight, please. He thought about Charlotte grabbing his face in both small hands on those porch steps. He thought about Oliver's prepared nod, already adjusted, already braced. The front door of the restaurant opened. James Carver walked in. He was 60 years old and looked it in a way that suggested the years had been worked rather than endured. He was lean, gray at the temples, wearing a dark overcoat that was wet at the shoulders from the Chicago rain. He came through the door with the specific confidence of a man arriving to collect something he had already decided belonged to him, and he made it 3 steps into the restaurant before he saw Ethan sitting across from Federici, and the confidence adjusted. Not disappeared, adjusted. The way a calculation adjusts when a new variable appears without invalidating the whole equation. He came to the table. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Federici. He looked at Federici's man standing with the burner phone. His eyes stopped on the burner phone. Something happened in his face. It was small, and it was fast, and it was the first uncontrolled thing Ethan had seen from him. Anthony, Carver said. His voice was still warm, still unhurried. I wasn't expecting... Sit down, James, Federici said. Carver sat. Federici took the burner phone from his man and set it on the table equidistant between all 3 of them. He looked at Carver with the same patient, measuring expression he'd turned on Ethan, the expression of a man applying equal weight to everything before he commits to a direction. Tell me about Daniel Rourke, Federici said to Carver. Carver looked at the phone on the table. His jaw moved once. I don't know who... James. Federici's voice didn't change temperature. It stayed exactly where it was, which was somehow more definitive than if it had dropped. I've known you for 22 years. Don't insult either of us. The restaurant held its silence. Carver looked at Ethan. His eyes were flat now, the warmth entirely gone. And what was underneath it was something cold and functional and very old. You had help, he said. I did, Ethan said. Sloan. Yes. Carver looked at the phone. He breathed out slowly through his nose, a long, controlled breath, the breath of a man making peace with an outcome. He looked at Federici. The arrangement he has with you, Carver said, has always benefited him more than... The arrangement, Federici said quietly, is not your business. It was never your business. You were told that 8 years ago. He picked up his wine glass and looked at it. You've spent 6 years building a move against a man I do business with, using fabricated evidence, and a woman I now understand was a professional criminal, and you've done it by compromising his security operation and positioning the results to make me the instrument of your grievance. He set the glass down without drinking. That is what I find most objectionable. Not the grievance, the method. Carver said nothing. You used me, Federici said, simply, finally. The 2 men near the walls had moved, almost imperceptibly, during this exchange. They were closer now. Not threatening, just closer. In the way that things close in when a decision has been made and the logistics of the decision are being arranged. Carver understood the logistics. Ethan could see him understanding them. The rapid internal assessment, the mapping of available options, the arriving at the place where the map ran out. He looked at Ethan one more time. 8 years ago, you took something that was mine, he he said. I built something to take it back. I know, Ethan said. I want you to know it wasn't personal. The warmth was completely gone. Just the statement, flat and direct. It was a business decision. Everything you destroyed, Ethan said, was personal to me, my family, my organization, my people. He held Carver's gaze. So I'm going to let you tell yourself it wasn't personal. But don't ask me to pretend I see it that way. Carver looked at him for a moment, then he looked away. Federici made a small motion to the man near the kitchen door. The man moved to Carver's side of the table. Carver stood without being asked, the way a man stands when he has run the numbers and understands resistance is a category of error he cannot afford. He straightened his coat. He looked at Federici once more. 22 years, Carver said. Yes, Federici said. A long time to end something. Carver left with Federici's man. The front door opened and closed, and he was gone into the Chicago rain. And what happened to him after that was in Federici's hands, and not Ethan's. And Ethan made the deliberate choice not to think about it further. Some outcomes you accepted without examining their full shape. The restaurant was very quiet. Federici sat across the table from Ethan, and they were alone now except for the one remaining man near the bar, and Federici looked at him with those old, measuring eyes and said nothing for a long moment. The documents they sent me this morning, Federici said finally. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen fabricated documentation many times. A pause. It was well done, good enough to create genuine doubt. I know, Ethan said. Doubt is expensive, Federici said. It costs things that are hard to price. Trust is one of them. I understand. Our arrangement continues, Federici said. But I want a full accounting of what Rourke accessed and what Carver's people may have retained. Within 30 days, everything he could have compromised, I want disclosed to me directly. You'll have it, Ethan said. Federici nodded once. He picked up his wine glass and finished it and set it down with the finality of a man closing something. Go home, Ethan, he said. Ethan stood. He picked up the burner phone and put it in his jacket pocket. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Federici, this 63-year-old man who had just made a decision that had, in its quiet and unremarkable way, determined the shape of the next several years of Ethan's life, and said, Thank you. Federici looked mildly surprised, as if gratitude was a currency he hadn't expected to receive tonight. He gave a small nod, nothing more. Ethan walked out. The air outside was cold and wet and real. He stood on the sidewalk in Bridgeport and breathed it and let it be cold against his face, and didn't get into the car immediately. Marcus was in the passenger seat watching him through the window. Priest sat behind the wheel. Neither of them said anything through the glass. They read the fact of him standing there, upright and intact, and understood that it had gone the right way, and left him to stand in it for a moment. He stood in it. He thought about the last 18 hours, the foyer of his empty house, the drive to Evanston, the conference room, Carver's voice on the phone, the parking structure in River North with Sloan standing against the concrete wall, the drive south with everything staked on something he couldn't fully verify. He thought about the cumulative weight of it and how it felt now on the other side, not like victory, which was a clean feeling, and this was not a clean feeling, but like something more complicated, like survival with an invoice attached. He got in the car. Done? Marcus said. Done, Ethan said. Marcus let out a long breath. Rourke, tomorrow, Ethan said. Handle it tomorrow. Tonight I need... He stopped. He looked out the window at the wet street. Take me to Evanston. Marcus turned to look at him. It's past midnight, Ethan said. I know. Take me anyway. He didn't ring the bell. He sat on the front porch steps of Patricia Hale's house in Evanston at 12:40 in the morning, and he sent Madeline a text that said, outside, not asking to come in, just needed to be close to where you are. Go back to sleep. Then he put the phone in his pocket and sat on the cold steps with his forearms on his knees and looked at the oak tree in the front yard, bare now, standing in its stripped and honest winter shape against the dark sky. He sat there for a long time. The front door opened at 12:57. Madeline came out wearing a heavy sweater over her pajamas, her feet in the kind of old wool socks that meant she'd grabbed them from wherever she'd had them before bed rather than choosing them. Her hair was loose. She wasn't wearing anything she'd chosen to be seen in, and he understood that meant she'd made a rapid decision to come out before she could talk herself out of it. She sat down on the step beside him. Not close, not far. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You're okay," she said. "Yes." "It's over?" "The immediate part," he said. "Yes." She nodded. She pulled the sweater tighter around herself. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. They sat together on the steps of her mother's house in the middle of the night, and the street was empty and silent around them, and the oak tree stood in its winter nakedness in the yard. "I'm not coming back," she said. Not unkindly, just clearly. "I know," he said. "I need you to actually know that," she said. "Not as a temporary, not as the thing I say that you wait out until I change my mind, because I'm not going to change my mind." He looked at the tree. "I know, Madeline." She looked at him. He could feel her looking at him the way he'd always been able to feel it. The specific attention of a person who has known you long enough to read what's underneath the presentation. "Something's different," she said. "Yes." "Tonight?" "Tonight. And before tonight." He rubbed his hands together slowly, a gesture that had nothing strategic about it, just a man's hands in the cold. "I've been thinking about the kitchen floor." She was quiet. "Not the SOS," he said. "Earlier than that. The moment before you sent it, when you were already down there, already alone in that house. I keep thinking about the fact that I did that. Not that I missed the message, that I built a life where the message was necessary, where you were in that position at all." He stopped. "I'm not saying this to get something. I don't expect anything from it. I just need you to know that I understand what I actually did, not the surface version of it." Madeline looked at the tree. "I disappeared," she said finally. "I know you know that, but I want you to hear it from me plainly. You didn't just neglect me. You made me smaller over years. Every time you chose the operation over us, every time I tried to tell you I was drowning and you handed me a temporary fix and called it done, I got smaller and I let it happen. That's on both of us." She paused. "But mostly it was you." "Yes," he said. "Mostly it was me." They sat in the cold. "I want the kids to know their father," she said. "The real one. Not the check-in version, not the every other weekend version. I want you present for them in whatever way we can build that isn't," she paused, "isn't just an arrangement." "I want that too," he said. "And I need you to get help," she said. "Real help. Not as a gesture towards something, for yourself." She turned to look at him directly. "Because you've been running so fast for so long that I don't think you actually know what's underneath it. And your kids need a father who knows that about himself." He held her gaze. "Okay. Okay means you'll do it, or okay means you're agreeing with me right now?" "Okay means I'll do it," he said. "I already made an appointment last week." He looked back at the tree. "Before any of this." "After the kitchen floor." She looked at him for a moment longer, then she looked away. "Good," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The cold settled around them, gentle and indifferent, the specific cold of late October turning toward November. Somewhere down the street, a car passed slowly and its headlights swept across the wet pavement and were gone. "I'm glad you're safe," she said. "Thank you for the text," he said. "Tonight, it mattered." She nodded once. Then she stood up, pulling the sweater tight. She looked down at him on the steps, this man she had loved and built a family with and lost to something slow and corrosive, and not dramatic enough to point to cleanly, and her face held what it held. Not cruelty, not warmth exactly, but something true. The face of a person who has made peace with a complicated thing and is living in the aftermath of that peace. "Go get some sleep," she said. "You look terrible." Something moved in his chest. He almost smiled. "Yeah." She went back inside. The door closed softly. He sat on the steps for a few more minutes. Then he got up and walked to the car. What? The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing that surprised him, how undramatic the actual change was once it began. He had expected the work on himself to feel like another operation, another set of objectives to execute against, another problem to solve with sufficient intelligence and effort. Instead, it felt like learning to sit still in a burning building and understand that some of what was burning needed to go. His therapist was a 60-year-old man named Dr. Aldrich, who had an office in Lincoln Park with good light and no couch, and who listened with the same quality of attention that Ethan associated with very dangerous people. Except that what Aldrich did with the attention was not weaponize it, but simply hold it, steadily, until whatever was being said had room to finish itself. Ethan went every week, then twice a week. It was uncomfortable in ways he hadn't anticipated and useful in ways he couldn't have predicted, and he did not tell anyone about it except Marcus, who received the information with the same composed neutrality with which he received all information, and said only, "Good." He handled Rourke. The handling of Rourke was the kind of thing that didn't have a clean shape, and Ethan carried it with him afterward in the way you carry things that are necessary and ugly and that you can't fully justify to anyone, including yourself. Rourke was gone from Chicago within 48 hours. Not harmed, but removed in a way that was final and communicated its finality completely. The financial damage he'd facilitated was absorbed. The operational vulnerabilities he'd exposed were closed, one by one, with the patience of people who knew that rebuilding trust in a structure required rebuilding from the foundation. Marcus oversaw it. He did not complain. Vincent rebuilt the financial architecture from the inside out over 2 months, working with the kind of focused precision that made Ethan understand why he'd hired him. The Federici arrangement held. The full disclosure Ethan had promised was delivered within the 30-day window. Everything Rourke had accessed, every channel that had been compromised, every contact who might have been exposed. Federici received it and read it and communicated his acknowledgement through the usual channels, and the arrangement moved forward on its established terms. It was not a victory. It was a restoration. There was a difference. Rebecca Sloan was never found. Ethan did not look for her. Not seriously, not with the resources he could have applied if he'd chosen to. The $4 million was gone, and he made the decision to let it be gone, to categorize it as the cost of a specific variety of blindness and move on. Marcus disagreed with this decision and said so once, and then accepted it and never raised it again, which was one of the things Ethan valued most about Marcus. James Carver ceased to be a problem in a manner that Ethan understood without being told. He did not ask for the details. Federici's accounting of things had its own logic and its own timeline, and Ethan understood that some debts were settled in currencies he was not positioned to audit. He let that be true and moved on. He saw Oliver and Charlotte 3 times a week, which became 4, which became a rhythm that reorganized his days around their schedules in a way that the Ethan of 18 months ago would not have recognized as something he was capable of. He took Oliver to his soccer games and stood on the sideline in the cold and did not look at his phone. He took Charlotte to a birthday party for a small girl named Emma and sat in a gymnasium with 12 4-year-olds and a woman whose name he never caught, who was clearly in charge of the music, and he ate cake from a paper plate and watched his daughter move through the world with her specific luminous confidence and felt something that he had no word for, but that was real. He missed Madeline in a way that was not desperate, which was new. He had spent a long time running from the awareness of what she meant to him, and now that she was not his, he simply missed her the way you miss something that was genuinely good. With a clear-eyed understanding of what it was, why it was good, and what its absence reveals about the shape of you, she healed. He watched it happen at a distance, through the medium of their children, through Oliver's accounts of things, Charlotte's enthusiastic reporting of their mother's activities, the occasional and careful co-parenting conversations that Madeline kept professional and warm in equal measure, never cold, never weaponized. She was, he understood, a better co-parent than he deserved, and he worked to be worthy of it. There was a man, eventually, a teacher at Oliver's school named David. Ethan learned this from Oliver, who mentioned it with the careful casualness of a child testing whether the information would cause damage. It didn't cause damage, or Ethan didn't allow it to cause visible damage, which was not the same thing but was the version he could offer. He told Oliver that was fine, that his mother deserved to be happy, and he meant it with about 70% of himself and worked on the remaining 30%. He sold the Winnetka estate. This surprised people. Marcus questioned it with a raised eyebrow that asked everything without saying anything. Ethan said, "It was a statement, not a home." He bought something smaller, in a neighborhood with actual neighbors, with a yard that was manageable rather than spectacular. He cooked in the kitchen sometimes, badly, and Oliver told him directly and with considerable specificity that the pasta was not good, and Ethan bought better pasta and tried again. Worm. A year and 3 months after the night on Federici's doorstep, Ethan was sitting in the yard of his new house on a Saturday afternoon in January, cold enough to see his breath, watching Oliver try to teach Charlotte a card game that she was refusing to learn correctly. The yard was nothing special. A rectangle of frozen grass, a fence, a bird feeder that Ethan had installed at Charlotte's request, and that had been visited by exactly one bird in 2 months. The sky was flat white, the kind of January sky that commits to nothing. His phone was inside. He had left it inside deliberately, the way he was learning to leave it inside, the way he was learning that the world did not require his continuous monitoring to continue functioning. Oliver looked up from the cards. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Why are you just sitting there?" "I like it out here," Ethan said. Oliver considered this with his serious face, then he went back to the cards. Charlotte said, without looking up, "The bird feeder is empty again, Daddy." "I'll fill it tomorrow," Ethan said. "You said that yesterday." "I'll fill it today," Ethan said. She looked up and assessed him. "Promise?" He looked at his daughter's face, the direct, uncompromising eyes that had inherited nothing from his careful opacity and everything from Madeline's honest clarity, 4 years old and already immune to deflection. "Promise," he said. She went back to the cards. He sat in the January cold and breathed and watched his children and filled his chest with the specific ordinary reality of the afternoon, the cold, the flat sky, Oliver's focused frown, Charlotte's refusal to learn the rules correctly, and understood that this was the thing. Not the recovery of the operation, not the survival of the Federici arrangement, or the exposure of Carver, or the night in Bridgeport that had gone the right way. This flat January afternoon in a yard that was nothing special, with 2 children who needed him to fill the bird feeder and meant it. He had built an empire. He had been a provider of spectacular and comprehensive things. He had ignored an SOS on a rainy October night, while the woman who sent it sat alone on a kitchen floor, and that choice, 3 seconds, no hesitation, had cost him everything that the empire had been built around. Not the empire, the center, the thing that made any of it worth anything. He understood this now. Not as a lesson, he was done processing it as a lesson, because lessons implied a clean pedagogical shape that the actual experience didn't have. He understood it the way you understand something that has changed the material of you. Not learned. Changed. The bird feeder was empty. He got up from the chair and went inside and found the bag of seed in the cabinet where he'd put it when Charlotte had made him buy it, and he went back out and filled the feeder while Oliver watched with mild interest, and Charlotte watched with the exacting attention of a quality control officer. He filled it to the top. He replaced the lid. He stepped back. "Good," Charlotte said, satisfied. He sat back down. The afternoon moved on in its unhurried way. The light shifted. The cold deepened slightly. Oliver won the card game. Charlotte disputed the victory extensively. Ethan mediated with the kind of patience that had not come naturally to him and that he was still building, one Saturday afternoon at a time. When Madeline came to pick them up at 5 o'clock, she came to the gate rather than the door, which was the arrangement they'd settled into, and Ethan brought the kids out bundled in their coats, and Charlotte immediately began telling her mother about the bird feeder with the enthusiasm of someone reporting a significant civic achievement. Madeline listened with her complete attention, the way she always listened to the children, and then she looked over Charlotte's head at Ethan. He looked back. There was nothing performed in it, no hope extended, no grief displayed, no strategic anything. Just 2 people who had been something enormous to each other, looking at each other across a gate in January with the full and ordinary and irreducible truth of what they had been and what they were now and what it had cost to get here. She gave him a small nod. He gave her one back. Charlotte took her mother's hand. Oliver said goodbye to his father with the handshake they had invented together 3 months ago, elaborate and private, theirs. Ethan watched them go down the sidewalk toward Madeline's car. Charlotte talking, Oliver with his backpack, Madeline's hand in Charlotte's. And he stood at the gate until the car door closed and the car pulled away and the street was empty. He stood there for another moment. The bird feeder was full. The sky was flat white, and the air was cold and the street was quiet, and Ethan Calloway stood at his gate with his hands in his jacket pockets and understood that this specific and unspectacular moment, this absence where his family used to be, this ordinary January street, was the truth of what a life looked like when you had finally, at considerable cost and far too late, learned to see what was actually in front of you. He had been a man who could not stop moving. He was learning to stand still. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and it was the only thing, in the end, that was worth doing. He went inside. He left the gate open a little, the way Oliver liked it, for reasons Oliver had never fully explained. And he went inside his small house on his ordinary street and closed the door on the cold, and the day finished itself around him in the particular quiet of a man who has stopped running, sitting alone with the weight of everything he earned and everything he lost, and the specific and necessary task of learning to live honestly in the space between the two.